a few minutes ago, so I'll keep my comments very brief, because I think going through the panel and then getting some conversation going and taking questions and that sort of thing, I think would be fun to mix it up that way. It's very interesting watching the budget discussion in Washington right now, because it's sort of on the back burner, because you actually have this bicameral committee, conference committee going on right now, negotiating what they're going to do next about the budget. For the first time in 4 years, Democrats actually passed a budget in the Senate this year. It was terrible, but they passed one. The House passed their own budget, and now they're going to try to reconcile them to whatever extent possible. And things are already off to a grand start, because they've ruled out any sort of big bargain on big issues, because the parties just don't see eye to eye on a lot of questions. The debt problem that we have is staggering, and it is scary. The left is celebrating the most recent deficit projections for this year, which estimate that the deficit will come in at about $680 billion. And they're saying this is great progress. It is great progress if you compare it to the last 4 years, where the deficit was over $1 trillion each year, but the $680 billion deficit of 2013 is still the 5th highest ever in U.S. history, 5th behind those other 4. I'll just toss out that there was a president who was in office for all 5 of those record deficits. But the left will say, our short-term deficit problem really isn't that bad. To some extent, they're right if you took the issue in isolation. But you cannot take annual deficits in isolation. You have to look at the bigger picture. You could say 1 or 2 years of bad deficits for emergency spending or whatever isn't the end of the world. But when we are consistently spending hundreds of billions or $1 trillion more than we take in every single year, as far as the eye can see, that is unsustainable. And the consequences of that are playing themselves out on the streets of a number of European capitals. And in places like Detroit, you can't play this monopoly money game forever. Eventually, reality intrudes. And the national debt, which is different than the annual deficit, and you see a conflation, I think an intentional conflation of that a lot. The national debt that we hear so much about is $17 trillion. But that is not even close to the real picture. I want to read to you a piece, or a small snippet from a piece in the Wall Street Journal. This was written by 2 members of President Clinton's bipartisan debt commission back in the 90s. They got back together and wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal just a few months ago describing what our actual true deficit is. Our true national debt. And by the way, the number was $87 trillion. Not 17, $87 trillion. And here's how they explain it. When the accrued expenses of government's entitlement programs are counted, it becomes clear that to collect enough tax revenue just to avoid going deeper into debt would require over $8 trillion in tax collections annually. This is the total of the average annual accrued liabilities of just the 2 largest entitlement programs, plus the annual cash deficit. Nothing like that $8 trillion amount is available for the IRS to target. In short, here's how they summarize it. If the government confiscated the entire adjusted gross income of Americans who are making $66,000 a year or more, so anyone making 66 grand or more in the country, if they confiscated every dime of income, 100%, plus all of the corporate taxable income in the year before the recession, where corporate taxable income was much higher, they still wouldn't have nearly enough to fund the over $8 trillion per year in the growth of U.S. liabilities. Which is to say, we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Which is, really honestly, this country is embroiled, Washington is embroiled in a battle between people who believe in math and people who don't. The other side doesn't believe in math. They want to wish it away. They want to pretend like these problems don't exist. And whenever anyone comes up with an idea to try to reform these programs that are fueling a lot of this debt, they take the easy way out and say, oh, but you're going to be making children starve, you're going to make old people die in gutters alone, you are heartless, you're mean-spirited. We have to break through that demagoguery if we have any chance of salvaging this thing. And it's tough when you have an entire political party whose messaging for decades has relied on demagoguery. You've got to break through it with facts. And the problem is, just like my remarks with Obamacare, sometimes it takes the tsunami hitting for people to realize that actually we were telling the truth all along. The problem is we can't afford that. I can't, I'm 28 years old. I hope to live in this country for many decades to come. I don't want riots in the street. I don't want to see real austerity. If you want the austerity that we talk about in this country involves, tweaking Medicare, tweaking Social Security, rates. That's not austerity. Austerity is what we see in Greece, where they're just taking a battle axe to their budget because they have no choice anymore. We have an opportunity in this country to get in front of these problems. It's a closing window. It's a rapidly closing window, actually. But we still have that chance. And we have to make the case now, while we still have that opportunity, before it's too late, which sounds like a sort of sky is falling, Chicken Little mentality. And I like being optimistic and positive because the public likes optimism. They don't like scariness. But these numbers speak for themselves, and they are scary. And as I said, we still have time to do something about it, but the moment of truth is drawing nearer than I think we would like to admit. And I think we're deluding ourselves in a lot of respects. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, hand it over to the congressman, and I'm looking forward to chatting and answering questions.
Thank you very much, Guy. Our second panelist is former Congressman Joe Walsh.
Thank you. Guy provided a great overview, so let me just make about 5 or 6 quick points, and then let's get to your thoughts and your questions. As he mentioned, we're not $17 trillion in debt. That's a bunch of hooey. The number that the Wall Street Journal put out may be accurate. I've seen estimates that were north of $100 trillion in debt when you count up our Social Security, Medicare liabilities, and other such things. And Guy's right. There was so much Obamacare news this week that the Obama administration couldn't jump up and do headstands about a $681 billion deficit, projected deficit this week. But to Guy's point, they wanted to. They wanted to say, look at the progress we're making. But again, as Guy said, we've just endured 4 years of trillion-dollar-plus deficits. And I've got to remind you, you know this, but this is so important to understand. The movement, the Tea Party movement, whatever you want to call it, it really began with President Bush. And it began at the height of George W. Bush's $400 to $500 billion deficits every year. We're a long, long way from that. And the projections are, you may see a dip for a few years for a couple of reasons, some that the media doesn't point out. But we're heading back like this because the lion's share of the spending, the problem in this country is all the entitlement spending. And oh yes, we're launching another entitlement program. It's a long slog. Having been in Washington for 2 years, and Guy knows these battles well, politicians were like, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds crying, and we had to impose this sequester on them. And none of them wanted this sequester. And now they have to live with this sequester. And it's a great misnomer that it's only Democrats who are up in arms with these automatic spending cuts. Automatic. Which have gone toward shrinking that deficit this year. Again, the media doesn't mention that. But truthfully, a number of Republicans are looking for a way out of this. And so we've got another super committee that's been formed, in essence, to deal with all of this. I'm not optimistic, and again, to Guy's point, the differences are so great between the two parties. So great. We get lost in numbers, but understand what Guy said is right. You have a party that literally, you got to respect this. Many of them don't understand it. The woman who beat me last year doesn't understand any of this. Many of the Democrats don't understand this. But the Democrats generally believe in a very large government that will do a lot of things. Do they understand math? No, very few do understand math. But they also just believe, because they've told me this privately, and I'm sure they've told Guy this privately. They can tax their way out of this. They'll find some millionaires, and they'll find some billionaires. They can tax their way out of this, and many of them believe that. Now, you do have some smart ones that understand there aren't enough millionaires and billionaires in this country to dent the debt or the deficit. The problem is the entitlements. Now look, I'm all about doing whatever we can to shrink discretionary spending. Get rid of the Federal Department of Education. Get rid of it. Get rid of the Department of Commerce. Get rid of it. I've got maybe 7 or 8 other departments right behind it. But we're a long way from that. We've got roughly, and Guy, I don't know what the latest number is, 10 to 11,000 people in this country retiring every day. And that's going to go on as long as the eye can see. And we're living longer. It's a good thing, okay? But we have a government that's supposed to support all of this. And what we know for certain is, if the country doesn't have the courage to reform Medicare, Medicare will disappear. If the country doesn't have the courage to reform Social Security, Social Security will disappear. And if states, can you say Illinois, don't have the courage to reform Medicaid, Medicaid will disappear. And maybe that's where we have to go before people wake up. Final political point. You have an interesting dynamic in Washington when it comes to spending and the size of government. And I alluded to this earlier. Democrats believe in big government for a whole host of reasons. Okay? Republicans generally, guys like Karl Rove and who's the real old senator from Arizona? John McCain, Mitch McConnell. Too many of these guys, look, let's just be straight. They generally believe in a big government as well. The argument they'll make is we Republicans, we can manage it better. We can run big government better. We know how to do that. What's really interesting is you had people like me go to Washington in 2010, and can you say Ted Cruz, a number of Republicans in 2012, who said, no, time out. No, I don't believe in big government. I want to shrink it. I believe in limited government. And so you have this fight right now in the Republican Party between the Karl Rove wing and the Ted Cruz wing. I can manage big government better than the Democrats. I want to shrink government. And until the Republican Party gets their arms around that debate, I don't know, it's going to be a while until we address politically the spending issues that really need to be addressed. Final thought. Every dollar the government spends is a dollar that Guy Benson can't spend, is a dollar that I can't spend, and is a dollar that you can't spend. We talk a lot about the debt and the deficit. But every dollar that that thing called government spends is a dollar that businesses in Schaumburg and Rosemont and Lombard and Antioch can't spend. That's a bad thing. Thanks.
Sorry? Yeah, so we'll now take questions. I'm actually going to start with one and put it to you guys, as a privilege I have here as moderator. And then I'm going to move around the room and let you all speak into the microphone so that we can capture these for our audience that's watching it on live stream. My question for you guys is, you both talked about the gravity of the problem, how far down the road we are. There's been a term used before called a tipping point to describe at what point we've spent so much that really we do face cataclysmic change, something like Greece. How close do you think we guys are to that in the country right now?
I mean, it depends on how you want to measure it. I will say that based on the government's own numbers right now, Medicare will be insolvent by 2026. I'm going to repeat that. Medicare, the program that Republicans are supposedly wanting to kill, will in fact be dead by 2026 if we just don't do anything about it. Paul Ryan has put together a proposal, actually with a Democrat. No one talks about the Senate co-sponsor of that idea, Ron Wyden from Oregon. This is a bipartisan idea that Ron Wyden had to run away from in 2012 because the Obama campaign was committed to attacking the bipartisan Ryan plan that would make Medicare at least more sustainable for a number of additional decades. And that was spun into killing Medicare, the program that's already going to be dead. And one of the things that really bothers me, and I've had conversations actually with younger people across the political spectrum, and I personalize it. I say, you look at every paycheck that you get, if they're lucky enough to have a job these days. Look at every paycheck that you get, and look at your gross pay versus your net pay. And there's obviously a difference there. What explains the disparity between your nominal pay and what you actually take home? And there's, various, you take out 401k if you're smart, you've got a few other things, you've got the income tax and that sort of thing, and then you've got Medicare and Social Security taxes that every single person by law is legally forced to pay. And I think it is so wrong that people my age, if you look at both Social Security and Medicare, and Social Security is an easier fix than Medicare is in terms of getting the trajectory a little bit better, but we are being coerced by the government to pay into a program, supposedly that we will benefit from, that we will never see a dime of. It is going away. This is immoral. You are stealing. You're stealing from us to prop up temporarily a broken program. How is this helping anyone? And the Ryan plan, they say, well, this is seniors, abandoning seniors. It doesn't affect current seniors. It doesn't affect anyone who's 10 years away from retiring. Now, I talked about that closing window. At some point, that's no longer going to be feasible. At some point, the next Medicare reform plan is going to be no longer a 10-year buffer zone, but maybe 8 years. And it'll get easier and easier. That's the problem. The closer we get to the cliff on Medicare, which is the biggest driver. Joe mentioned this. If you look at that big $87 trillion pie of debt, 40-some-odd trillion unfunded promises are Medicare. That is just a glaring, huge problem. If you don't get your arms around that thing, the closer you get to the tipping point, the easier it is for the other side to use hysteria and fear tactics to attack plans to fix it, which is one of the more discouraging things, I think, that we've seen, one of the more discouraging dynamics. So that's the message that I keep trying to share with fellow millennials, which is they are stealing this money from you. They are lying to you, saying that it's going in some lockbox somewhere in some trust fund. No, it's not. It is not. And I think as people wake up to that and say, well, that's wrong. That pisses me off. Why are they doing this to me? Either fix the program or stop forcing me to pay for this thing and telling me I'm like, exactly. We need, and it's not a hard concept, Joe. I mean, it really isn't that. There's a lot of complex things in Washington, and we can have fights, and I would love to at some point get into it back and forth about the direction of the party, the Republican Party, and, you know, because I think we might have some tactical disagreements, actually. But at the end of the day, these core issues are not that hard. And the problem is one side of the aisle is committed to avoiding these problems head-on because they have all these little constituency groups that won't allow them to. And plus their ideology won't allow them to. And that's going to head us into a crash at some point. So I dodged your question about the exact year, but I'll give it to you based on the government's own numbers on Medicare. It is 2026. Helpful.
Quick answer. If you define tipped, have we already tipped? My definition of tipped is the only way out of it is to crash. Illinois is already tipped. The only way Illinois will be saved is when it crashes. And the country is not far behind that. I go back to Obamacare. And this is why I think the fight against Obamacare is so important. We can't have any manifestation of this new entitlement program on our landscape at all. If it is allowed to stay in any form, find another country. Go somewhere. Which one, Guy? That's a good question. Yeah. That can't be allowed to stand. And again, Guy and I may disagree on this. This is why, I know a lot of people don't like this description of the country at war. We are, because this is the way the other side looks at it. And their war is, their move is just to plant Obamacare, and then beg for help. Come on, help me keep it. Help me make it better. Come on, guys, help me. I know you didn't vote for it, but we can't get rid of it now. You got to do something to help save this. Can't. Let it die. Don't delay it at all. Don't delay any part of it. Don't fix it. Don't revise it. Don't make it better. If you make it better, it stays. And none of it can stay. Final thought. Medicare and Social Security, and Guy talked about this, and Medicaid. As a country, we've forgotten what these programs were meant to be when they came to us. And some of you have heard me say this, Medicare. Medicare came to us in the 60s to be the program for seniors in need. It's there now for every senior. Nobody questions it. Medicaid for the indigent. 1 in 4 in Illinois. Social Security. Have the courage, and I think this is passing Paul Ryan by. We need dramatic reform. We're living too long. As a country, most of us have to assume the responsibility for our own health care costs and our own retirement. Most of us. And until we get to that place, we'll never recover.
Thank you. Next question.
I personally think we're past the tipping point in the United States of America, because you didn't bring up the point that we are printing money to pay for our own debt, and that we're printing, you probably know the figures better than I, millions or billions of dollars every year and watering down the currency. I think we should be focusing on how to survive for what lies ahead. I don't think we should give up the fight in any way, but I think we should start speaking the truth of how this is all unraveling and falling apart.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the borrowing problem is very real. I believe the number was by 2030, based on the current level of tax receipts that we take in. So the amount of money that we take in, which is at about a historical average now, in terms of the rate. That amount of that pool of money will pay for Social Security, Medicare, and servicing the debt, and nothing else. Everything else, including the military, defense, everything else will be paid for by borrowing or something, unless we really change the way we're going here. That is scary. Now, in terms of how we talk about these issues, it's difficult, because the public doesn't have an appetite for doom and gloom. So you have to find a way to tell the truth to people without making them feel so uncomfortable and scared that they either don't believe you because it sounds too apocalyptic, or they just don't want to hear that and they'll just shut you down. Which is why you have to, it's difficult to talk about these questions. And to Joe's point about Paul Ryan, for instance, if Paul Ryan, I guarantee, if Paul Ryan were to walk from behind this curtain, we'd all say, oh, yay, Paul, you're here, and we interviewed him off the record without a single camera here, I mean, of course he would be absolutely committed to reforming Social Security, root and branch. He's got a Social Security plan that involves major reforms. What Paul Ryan is doing is in his budgets, he's not touching Social Security because he's already got the live wire Medicare he's trying to get under control, which is the slightly bigger problem. And if he tries to do both, that's just more ammo for the other side to be like, he's trying to take your Medicare and your Social Security. Extreme, radical. People go, oh. You know, and so it's messaging in today's political environment is very important, and it's also very difficult when they've got an easy, lazy way to talk, and we have difficult truths to tell. And that's why I think picking battles and focusing messaging is the best way to do it, which is my defense of Paul Ryan, based on sort of your implicit knock. And I understand you get it, but
It wasn't meant to be implicit.
and your explicit knock.
One thing I'll add is understand the context we're in right now. I think, and Guy probably thinks, and we all think, we're already taxed too much right now. I want to go back from where we are now. Most Americans don't get to keep most of what they make right now. We talk about the borrowing. The tax situation right now is profound. Because again, every dollar you take out of Guy Benson's wallet is a dollar he can't do good with. And we've already crossed that point right now.
You indicated that the best way to fight Obamacare is to just leave it alone. I'm for that. Something easy for a change. But my question is, if we did that, how long do you anticipate it would take for us to turn around, cancel the law, and get a little bit up to speed on taxes and all that good stuff? Because obviously we don't have a long time.
Well, and again, I don't know that Guy necessarily agrees with this strategy. If I could run the Republican Party, this is what I'd advise. I don't think this is what they're going to do. The political pressure to extend and delay and revise is going to be too great. But my only premise is it's bad. In any form, it's bad. The notion that it will fall apart on its own, yeah, I suppose there's some credibility to that. But that doesn't excuse Republicans from fighting with everything they've got right now to oppose it. And again, contrarian view, I thought what Ted Cruz did was masterful, wonderful. And look, great, smart, well-intentioned Republicans, we're all over the map on this one. Okay, so this is one we should never argue about, because this was literally a tactical difference. And I liked the tactic of fighting, because I think we're at a point in this country where a lot of those unaware, kind of independent Americans out there, I think they were ready to see a real fight. Now, did we message the fight as well as we should have? No. But there was huge value in the fight. So both things need to be done. Fight it at every chance we can. Let it fall apart. The odds of it falling apart sooner, if Republicans could magically just not do anything to it, it's the law of the land. Why change it? Excuse me. That's a fairly easy argument to make. Mr. President, you asked for this law. You got this law. Why mess around with it? Why are we revising it? We were told this is the greatest thing to hit this country since Medicare in the 60s. Why does it need revision? Why do 2,000 groups need waivers? Why do members of Congress and their staffs need a subsidy? This thing's wonderful. Why do you need to delay any aspect of it? It's a tough case to make, but it's one I would make.
And I'm going to disagree, just to spice things up a little bit here. And first, let me start on a point of agreement, which is us tearing each other apart over tactical differences is toxic. We have enough trouble beating the other side, and you can't beat the other side when you are endlessly attacking one another. And so, you know what? I am really glad that Mitch McConnell is the Senate Republican leader. I actually think he is doing a great job. And I'm also really glad that Ted Cruz got elected in 2012 and is representing the people of Texas. I think there is room in the party tent for the Cruz wing all the way over to the McCain wing, and everyone groans, but you need people who are willing to vote for the McCains of the world to be in a governing coalition. If you think that our problem as a conservative movement is that we have too many people in it right now, that's a little scary. You know, we've just gotten our butts kicked in the last 2 presidential elections. So we need...
For you. And I'm sorry to stand up, but I'm sitting there listening to you, and every time I listen to John McCain, he's like, when he was up for election, he said, I'm going to, you know what I'm saying, I want this damn border secure.
Yep.
And on the mean side, you know what I'm saying, on the other side, as soon as he's done, you know what I'm saying,
He voted against it.
I'm tired of, you know what I'm saying, these, you know what I'm saying, these people that, you know, they call themselves conservative. And at the same time, you know what I'm saying, they run towards conservatism, and then, you know what I'm saying, as soon as they're not elected, they've got some security, they say the hell with it. You know what I'm saying, and they vote with the Democrats. I'm tired of it. And they attack the conservative side of the Republican Party. Just, you know what I'm saying, in fact, they attack them more.
Yeah, no, let me address that. I think that the attacks that are lobbed back and forth come from both sides. You have the McCain folks calling the Tea Party folks wacko birds and all this craziness. Then you've got Ted Cruz saying that people who disagree with his defund plan, which had no chance of working, if you disagree with him tactically, then you are now a supporter of Obamacare. And you know what? That offended me because I have fought every day since 2009 to beat Obamacare, and because I disagree with what Ted Cruz was doing tactically, now I'm all of a sudden a supporter of it? No, that's not fair either. So I think we need to cool off. What?
Has anybody called you names over it?
Oh, I'm called a rhino, squish, traitor all the time. You should read my comment section in Town Hall. It's great fun. But my point is we need to find areas of common agreement, and right now we have an obvious one, which is the failure of Obamacare, where we can, every single Republican in Congress, from Olympia Snowe and Susan Collins to the most conservative member imaginable, every last one of them voted against Obamacare. The only yes votes on Obamacare came from Democrats. And so forcing them to own their failures, whether that's by doing absolutely nothing, whether that's there are tactical debates that can be had, this is a unifying principle that I think we can rally around rather than trying to purge people out of the party. Because if you purge the Tea Party, the Republican Party has no chance of winning. But if you go off and create a third party, that helps Democrats. If you've got the center-right split and the left unified, the left wins. So we have real disagreements. There is real frustration, and I hear it from both sides all the time. I try to be a bridge conservative who says, hey, everyone, we're all welcome, because we don't have the luxury of peeling people off. We need more people to rally to our message right now.
Thank you, Guy.
And the only thing I'd add to what Guy said is this. My premise is, and I could be dead wrong, I believe the Tea Party movement is bigger than the Republican Party. I don't, and this goes to messaging, I don't think it's some fringe wing movement of the Republican Party. The Tea Party movement revolves around this basic premise. We have a government that does too much for too many of us. If we don't fix that right away, we're bankrupt. Now, damn near every Republican believes that. Most independents believe that. And a hell of a lot of Democrats believe that. That movement of people who believe in that premise is bigger than the Republican Party. that movement needs to do a better job, we do, of messaging what we're about. The Republican Party needs us. We're bigger, I think.
You know what? I see every single Democratic politician sticking together. No one ever goes against them. But the Republicans, there are more traitors. There's only a few that I can stand behind. You mentioned Paul Ryan. He had me fooled the last election. He supposedly now wants to save Social Security and Medicare, but he's going to help write an immigration bill that's going to allow 30 million people to go on Medicare possibly and Social Security. I will never vote ever again for a Republican with just an R in front of it. I would rather sit home at this point because at least with a Democrat, I know what I'm getting. But to get on and get behind a Republican and have them screw us, I'm done with it. I'm absolutely done. I would rather vote for a Libertarian. I'm done with it. I've had enough of it. I worked so hard the last 4 years, and for them to do what they did to us, they said if we voted for them in 2010, they would cut down the deficit, they would toe the line, and they didn't.
Just say this. I need you to be more passionate. I need a little more fire. I will say this, I'll just comment on the issue. And again, Guy and I may disagree on this. Hear me well, if the Republican Party supports any version of amnesty, the party will die the next day. Now, you got to message it better than that.
I would say, in response to your frustration, Republicans in 2010 were elected to run the House, and they've kept the House. They haven't had the Senate since 2006, and they obviously haven't had the White House since 2008. As conservatives, we believe in the Constitution. And the Constitution is set up in such a way that if you control one House of Congress, you really can't do very much proactively. What you can do is block bad ideas. There has not been a single tax increase that Republicans have voted for, with the one exception of the fiscal cliff, where it was going to be a tax increase for every single American or for 1%. The Democrats stared us down, were united, and they won. But the Republican House of Representatives has blocked a lot of bad things from happening, like cap and trade, like card check. In order for us to govern with conservative principles, we actually need to win elections. We need to win the Senate. We need to have the White House. You can't run the government from just the House. And so, look, I share your frustration sometimes at how powerless Republicans seem to be and how they don't always stand up for the things that they run on. I think that is a fair criticism. But if you get so fed up with that to the point that you sit home, that is an in-kind donation to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And you say, hey, at least we know what we're getting. Yes, you do. You're getting Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid. And if that's what you want and you're going to sit at home to allow them to win, I mean, I just cannot more strongly disagree with that. I stay involved, because if you take your ball and go home, and more people like that do, you are giving the other side a victory. We literally can't afford that.
Guy's right about that. Don't take your ball and go home. And you know, maybe Obama was an inevitable force, but John McCain was a lousy candidate. He didn't fight this fight or talk this talk. And God love Mitt Romney, because I think Mitt Romney would have been a pretty good president. Mitt Romney did not fight this fight. If he had fought this fight and talked like Guy and I are talking right up here now, he'd be president.
I've got a question over here.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here. I have to make a couple of statements before I ask the question. One, about 20, 25 years ago, I did small speaking engagements with Clark Weber and a group he put together against Hillary Care. My part of the presentation was how Hillary Care would affect my ability to access insurance for my son. With that, I will say that for the last 4.5 years, I've had 2 signs nailed to my deck. I live on Jackson Boulevard in Oak Park, liberalism personified. The first sign I had up for 2 years said, Congress no nobility, must have the same health care. Call your representative, vote no. Got egged, got called bad names, was I'm a pariah in town. My second sign after that was repeal Obamacare. These signs are 4 by 6 foot. Sometimes they had a spotlight on it, depending on how many times they had to buy a new spotlight, because we're playing soccer in the backyard. Now, with that, I want to say that my third son would have passed before 5 years old had it not been for good insurance and a fabulous medical system. He's now 40 and healthy. With the event that Obamacare is destroying our medical system as it exists last year, Cleveland Clinic passing out, quitting. What about Northwestern? I mean, I've had this kid at Rush, at Northwestern, Mayo Clinic, the best places with the best physicians. When this is destroyed a year from now, how are we going to get this back? There's people now, a man called into Rush's show this week, said that his wife has stage 4 cancer. His insurance will be canceled December 31st, and he can't find anybody to pick him up. Where are we going to go? I mean, my kid would be dead, and he's produced well. I mean, he was a stick pot through high school, but I've got identical twin daughters that are fabulous. Good interest on my loan.
Thank you. And keep the fight up in Oak Park. My God, is that
All right, we have time for one more question.
Hi, this is for Guy. I appreciate very much your point regarding the tactics of electoral politics. If we savage one another, both sides of this debate, we have no chance, and that is true. The problem I have, however, is look at what's actually happening. Which side of the debate in the Republican Party has been aggressive in trashing the other? The people in power. Not so much in the House. The House Republicans have done pretty well when you really give them a fair shake. It's the Senate Republicans that have done terrible. You got McCain and his ilk openly and publicly trashing Cruz, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, the Tea Party movement, were terrorists, all kinds of bad things.
Terrorists were the Democrats called us terrorists.
Okay. Maybe he didn't use that term, but he used a lot of terms pretty close. Traitors. Whatever they are, okay? Your point is correct. We have to unify. But don't you also agree that the people on the more, let's say, moderate side have to prove, when they run these elections, they have to back Tea Party people when they're up for elections and primaries and so on?
Well, yeah,
Instead of trashing them open.
Yes, I mean, obviously, this is the symbiotic relationship that we have to work out as a movement. And I'll say it again, and I know that you think, whatever the percentages are of the base versus moderates versus independents that we need to vote for us, people who've been voting for Democrats, we need them to vote for us in the future. So you can't have necessarily Ted Cruz running in every district in the country. He would do well in some, would do terribly in others. You have to understand there are different types of Republicans, and that's a necessity. But I completely agree with you that the name-calling, the internal bickering and name-calling is pernicious, and it's deeply problematic, and it does happen on both sides. And both sides need to be called out when they do it, because ultimately, we have to play on the same team here, or else we lose every game. And so I'm with you on that, and I get frustrated when I see McCain spouting off. Pete King has said some horrible things over on the House side. Just really frustrating. Like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? Yeah, no, I understand they're in power. Pete King and John McCain both have voted repeatedly to repeal Obamacare. So I'd rather have Pete King and John McCain's vote on that issue than Democrats voting against us. But I'm also not going to sit back and when John McCain yells about wacko birds, talking about Rand Paul, who made a really good point, by the way, with that filibuster. I don't know what planet John McCain was living on that day, but we have to stop. And that goes the other way, too. This purity-only politics. If you disagree with me on issues X, Y, and Z, you're purged, you're dead to me, I'll never vote for you. Well, I think it was Ronald Reagan who talked about the 70-30 split. If you're with us, 2/3 of the time and against us, that's an ally, not an enemy. And so that's a lesson that I think we're struggling to learn at the moment. And last point on this. There has been, and this is not a slam on Boehner, McConnell, these guys, especially McConnell, I think, is doing the best that he can do. There has been, and you can boo Mitch McConnell, that's fine, but I think Mitch...
Don't boo Guy Benson.
I think Mitch McConnell's doing a great job, but there has been a lack of leadership within the center-right coalition. You can argue with who... It ultimately takes someone leading a party. Barack Obama is the leader of the Democratic Party. Everyone knows it, and he has been ruthlessly effective at getting his people. He got Mark Pryor and Mary Landrieu and all these people to vote for Obamacare when it was against their own political interest to do so, because they march in lockstep over there. And they very, very rarely step out of line. And it's only when they feel like they're in really deep political, you-know-what, do they step out of line. We don't do that. And that's part of being free-minded people. We're not top-down, take your medicine, follow your orders types of people. We're not thugs, right? We are open-minded. But we also have to understand there is value in being organized and clever and picking our battles and being on the same page and sticking to a message, which we're so bad at. So bad.
Just quickly. Republicans are fighting in public right now, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's a healthy thing. Republicans and Democrats over the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years have gotten along just fine. They've reached across the aisle year after year and election after election. And what's the result of all of this? $87 trillion in debt! Okay, so they've gotten along just fine. The reason you have a fight in the Republican Party is you have a bunch of new Republicans who went there in 2010 and 2012 and said, time out. We're done doing things the old way. And admittedly, guys like McCain and McConnell and establishment Republicans are uncomfortable with it. So that's why you have this dynamic. And as Guy said, look, there's no unrest in the Democratic Party. They're all signed up, lock, stock, and barrel. Thank you.
And thank you, Congressman Walsh and Guy Benson. Guys, can we have applause for our great speakers?